Welcome back. My name is BasilMillwood and I play chess. And I'm trying to get stronger as a player, go up rating ladder. On my journey of chess, I'm planning on sharing it as well as trying to help others as well who might have questions about how to improve. And today I decided let's make a video on studying master games because you might be interested in that. Who isn't? So today's game is actually between Nicolas Rossolimo and Paul Reissmann. Now Paul Reissmann, I couldn't find any info on him, but well, how to put it, Rossolimo was pretty famous, if you will. Not famous, but you should have heard of the Rossolimo variation in the Sicilian defense, at least, or maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, but it's named after him. So first off, Nicolas Rossolimo was born on February 28th, 1910. He was a Russian Empire-born chess player, and well, uh, he was born in Kiev. So he acquired this Greek citizenship in 1929, which allowed him to immigrate to France. And well, he was many times the chess champion of Paris. In 1952, he immigrated to the United States and won the 1955 US Open Chess Championship. He was awarded the title of International Grandmaster by FIDE in 1953. I'm not going to go more in depth there, but I think it's a good idea to know who Rossolimo was. So as you can see, there's no eval bar, because I'm actually not going to use Stockfish for this. We're going to actually go through it on our own. And actually, a nice way of how to learn how to do studying a chess game is doing the following. Get yourself a piece of paper and a pen. You could use a notepad on your computer as well if you really want to. This is a notebook. As you can see, this is what it looks like. So we're going to go through the game. I specifically chose a game that that's the most common on the Lichess database, which is E5, E4, Knight F3, Knight C6, and then Bishop to C4, which is the Italian. Now, I played the King's Pawn opening or E4 a lot before I started playing the English, which is C4. And sometimes I want to go back to it, but yes, I think there's a lot to learn from it. Most books you will find, even people online will tell you E4 is the best place to start as a beginner. So for that very reason, I decided let's actually go and do an E4 opening. So first off, first move was E4 in this case. So we've got E4 and our opponent played E5. So why is E4 played, you may wonder? Well, one of the opening principles is center control. Just writing that down. Center control. So the pawn was moved to control some central squares. The center is regarded as these four squares. In a sense, these squares is also considered center, but it's not as important as these four central squares, which is E4, E5, D4, and D5. So black played in this game E5, saying, okay, I'm going to do the same thing, control some central squares and gaining space, if you will. So first off, the reason the move was played was center control. Secondly, it actually did improve a piece, multiple pieces actually, but it did improve pieces. So in the starting position, the bishop can't go anywhere, and the same with the queen. So by playing e4, not only can you now develop your bishop, it sees a lot more than it did before. So we're looking at 5 squares it now controls, in a sense. Not fully, if you really want to say it, it controls four squares perfectly. At this point, it's not those squares aren't contested. So you can't, for example, in this position play b5 because, well, it hangs a pawn. So e4, e5, and white played knight f3. You've heard of develop your pieces, so this is one of them. Develop your pieces. Not only is the piece developed, it is also not developed this way, and it's also not developed this way. And it's rather important. So yes, we could say I'm moving a piece, getting it out of the way so I could possibly castle later on. So why not play knight h3? Well, first off, it isn't controlling the center, which is another thing. Control center. And your piece is actually not that much improved. So in the previous position of knight on g1, it is seeing 3 squares at this point. Moving it to h3, leaves it with still, okay, it sees 4 squares, but none of those squares are very important. Whereas knight e2 is a bit better. It's developing to the center, allowing for, 4 squares of control. But knight f3 is much better because, well, it still controls those 2 squares and this third square. But it's controlling 2 central squares. It's attacking the pawn, forcing black to make a decision, will he protect it or not? So developing with tempo. Develop with tempo. And secondly, the piece is very active. It's actually doing something at this point. Whereas on e2, black could play knight f6 if they wanted to. So in this position, I think black could play this. And now white has to respond to it. I haven't looked into it. I didn't even know that had a name, by the way. I'm actually going to look it up after the game because that looks very interesting to look at. But piece activity is very important as well. We're going to look at all the moves and see how we can apply them throughout the game, because the opening principles is going to be applied to the middle game and the end game. They have their own principles as well, but it's very important to look at those moves as well. So knight f3, and black is forced to decide, will I protect my pawn or not? He can decide, no, I'm not going to protect my pawn and play knight f6, which will allow white to pick up a knight, and there's some reasons why black shouldn't take immediately, but that's not very traditional. Second move that black could play is the d6, protecting the pawn, but now white is ahead in development. So black decides, I'm going to activate the piece. Again, the piece is improved, the piece is developed, and it's doing something. And so in that position, white can't take the pawn anymore, which is very, very important. So white continues with bishop c4, again developing the piece, putting it on a very active square. He didn't put it on e2, it isn't doing much there, but now it is actually controlling d5. There's 2 people or 2 pieces, the bishop and the pawn, saying you can't play d5. Secondly, It's center control once more, and the piece is just much more improved. Putting the bishop, for example, on d3 would mean that it's very hard to develop your bishop on c1. So black continues with playing bishop c5, saying, okay, I don't need to respond to anything you've done right now. In this position, knight f6 is also a very possible move instead of bishop c5. In fact, I think this knight f6 is the main move. But anyway, so again, now black is saying you can't play d4 yourself, as these two pieces is controlling d4. And the bishop is on a very active square. Rossolimo decides to play c3. It's an idea in the Italian, where not only are you saying, I'm going to develop in the center, take the full center at the end of the day, but I'm also maybe thinking of bringing my queen to b3 and having this battery of pieces on f7. So in this case, it doesn't follow like you didn't develop a piece, you moved a pawn, stuff like that. But at the same time, you're threatening to take the full center. So in that case, I almost want to say full center is possibly also a very strong move. Also, in addition to that, it stops the bishop or knight from black to go to b4. So neither of these two pieces can go there anymore. So it restricts your opponent's movement a little bit. So let's just add restrict opponent's piece mobility. Restrict Okay, so restrict opponent's piece mobility. And we're also going for full center. So I'm just going to put in full center control. Or actually, you don't even need to do that. It's just center control. You want to have total control of the center. If you can play d4 and have a pawn on d4, he doesn't have the pawn on e5 most likely. And yeah, it's just good for white. So black just says, okay, I'm attacking your pawn on e4. Again, it's developing with tempo, improving the piece and developing it, and getting ready to castle the next move. White says, I'm just going to play d4 because d4 actually threatens your bishop. You can take my pawn, but then I'm going to take your bishop, and you can't castle because then I take your bishop as well, which is both just very bad. Which again comes back to why d4 actually works. It's generating a threat, which is very important. And how to put it, where do I put it next or not? Oh, it was, yes. Sorry, I just had to close the door. So d4, you're taking the full center and forcing black to make a move. If you will, again, tempo. It's a forcing move. So again, forcing, let's put in forcing moves. So we should be looking at center control to develop our pieces, or rather, if you will, more accurately, improve our pieces. Control the center, develop with tempo, and again restrict our opponent's piece mobility. So black is forced to make a move here. He's forced to capture. If he doesn't capture, let's say he moves his bishop away, you're just going to push the pawn one more step, or you don't even really need to move it, but you can, and you're gonna keep on making black move. So black takes on d4, e takes on d4, and white plays c takes on d4. Now white has a full center. Again, knight takes on e4 is not possible in the position, and black decides, okay, I'm gonna check your king, which again is a forcing move. It saves the bishop for right now. You don't have to take. Taking here is not a good trade, as this is the position you'll end up in. So black decides to play bishop b4 check, forcing white to make a move, and there's no forced capture sequence. White says, okay, let's play bishop to d2, blocking the check and saying, if you're not going to take me, I'm going to take you in the future. Again, knight takes on d4 is not an option. Knight takes on e4 is an option, but this is most likely what will happen. Knight takes on e4, bishop takes on b4, knight takes on b4. White will castle and be fine. So black decides instead to play bishop takes on d2. And again, white had two ways, three ways if you will, four ways to take back. He could have taken with the king, but giving up castling rights is not a very good, there has to be a very good reason to do that. Secondly, the queen could take. Thirdly, the knight on f3 could take, and fourthly, the knight on b1 could take. But why take with the queen? And again, this is another idea, don't develop your queen early or too early. Don't develop queen too early. There is cases when you can bring out your queen in the first 10 moves, but in this case, why not rather take with the knight on b1, actually improving it and defending your pawn on e4. So maybe it would have been better for black to just take on e4 or castle, but this is but black decided to take, and now it allows white to bring in another piece into the game, controlling, or rather contesting the center, if you will. But white is simply controlling the center at this point. Black decides to play d5, saying, okay, I'm going to contest your center. I don't like what I'm seeing here. It's a forcing move once more. If, for example, white moves his bishop away, the pawn will take on e4, and you can't take back. You have to move your knight, and maybe the knight will not go to a good spot. So in this scenario, white actually takes on d5, he takes on d5, knight takes on d5, and queen to b3. So now the queen is brought into the game, and it is developed, improved, and it is doing something. There's a tempo involved. So I think black was thinking he's going to take and then castle, because he can't actually take my knight. And white just simply said, okay, he still can't castle, because to castle, you would lose your knight, because there's now two attackers and only one defender. So two attackers and one defender. Black decides we're going to protect once more with knight c2 e7. There's a reason for why not to just move on d5, and that is f7 is very weak. The only protector is the king, and there's two attackers on it, so white will most likely play bishop takes on f7 check and force the king to move. So now there's two defenders, and as you can see, black has only 2 pieces developed. White has all of its minor pieces developed, and its queen is developed, and will castle. I think this is remove it castles. Yes, so king safety is also very important. So another thing to look out for, king safety. So now I should actually say this. Another thing how to play the game, except besides looking at all these guidelines, if you will, that's being written down and looking at it, you should think, what is my opponent going to play next? So what threats do my opponent have? I'm just going to write here threats. It counts both for me and my opponent. I think black is just going to castle, and then he can move his knight. The reason being that if he castles, this is no longer that big of a weakness right now, because the rook also protects it, and it will allow the knight to possibly rotate from d5 to b6, attacking the bishop and saying, let's trade my knight for your bishop. Or he might even just develop a piece. But instead of castling, which does not follow the idea of king safety, black decides to play c6. Now, I think there's a twofold idea here, and one of the ideas is just to protect the knight. Now, there's 3 defenders, and secondly, you could play b5 later on. But here's the problem: rook e1 is an improving move since you're developing your piece. Open files is very important, as the E file is not open. So an open file is a file that doesn't have any pawns on it. So this file doesn't have a black pawn or white pawn, so it's open. Whereas the C file has a 1 pawn, but it's black. Some people consider it still an open file for white, but it's called a semi-open file. So besides developing and improving the rook is now also pinning this knight to the king. So again, developing with tempo. And yeah, so black castles now, doing king safety at last. I think it might have been better to do it the previous move, because you could have played c6 here as well, but it is what it is. And in fact, you could even consider playing bishop e6 as well, as it also defends the knight and semi-develops the bishop. It's not going to be easy to attack it. You could maybe play knight to g5, but I'm a bit iffy on that. Anyway, so white decides to play a4. Again, this is another idea, taking space. So taking space means just that in this case you're controlling b5, and you're just doing you can maybe move your pawn closer, and the closer it gets to the last rank or closer to promotion, the more dangerous that pawn actually gets, because it stands a chance of becoming a passed pawn at some point. And also, a4 stops b5, the idea of driving the bishop away. So if b5 happened, a takes on b5, and c takes on b5, the knight could take. The bishop could take. So it stops the opponent's threat. The threat in this position was for black is to play b5, and white stops it. So stop threats is also an idea, or prophylaxis. I think that's the name of it. Is we move is the name for it as well, but I'm just going to call it stop threats. So black is now looking at this position, but if I were to think on what white could do, it's probably to put the rook on rook A to C1. It's an idea that I would look at as white, but also trying to think, is there a way to put more pressure on the knight? Not really. So, but at the same time, I don't have to make a move as white. In this, okay, so it's not white to move anyways, but if I were to look at it, I don't see a threat for white. So if I were black, I'm just going to flip it for a moment. If you're black, I don't see what white's next move is. It could be to play rook A to C1. It could be many things. I don't know what white's next move is. So instead of trying to prevent a threat, we're going to try and once more improve our pieces. Now, black plays b6. And the idea, I think, is simply to play bishop to b7. But I'm not so sure about if that was the correct move to play. I would have most likely has played bishop to f5. It's very active there. It stops stuff. It's not that easy to attack. I don't know. But back to white, because we're actually trying to follow Rossolimo here, as he's the one that, spoiler alert, won the game. And he's also the man whose name is more famous, if you will. So the master game we're studying today is actually a game by Rossolimo, if you will. I will tell at the end of the game what the where it was, the event took place, this match took place, and I will post the PTN down below in the description as always. So white played knight e5, immediately going after something, and this is called weakness. Attack weakness. I'm just going to say attack weaknesses. And this is actually why b6 felt wrong, now that I think about it. So knight e5 is just improving the knight even more. It now sees even more important squares. So the closer the more squares your pieces are either controlling or contesting in your opponent's half of the board, which is, if we're playing white, is this is black's territory, if you will. So the more pieces we contest or control in this section, the better for us. And so knight to e5 improves a piece, making it see more. And secondly, we're attacking c6, sort of pinning, well, not pinning, but keeping black's knight on e7 stuck to the protection of his pawn. Now, black is almost forced to play bishop b7 or a queen move to protect it, maybe push a pawn. Black could play in this position, let's say f6, because this is sort of an outpost. The idea of an outpost, so let me put this in as well, outpost. An outpost is a place that you can put your a piece of yours, like your rook, your knight, your bishop, maybe even your queen, and it's protected by a pawn. But the piece can't be attacked by a pawn either. So this is sort of an outpost, but not fully, because f6 is possible. But f6 is a very, very weakening move. It weakens the diagonal to your king. So the a2 to g8 diagonal gets extremely weak if you play f6, and I wouldn't play a f move, a f pawn move if I'm castled on the king side without thinking through it very thoroughly. And what I mean with that is, if I cannot see how my opponent is going to use that file to check my king, then I might consider it. But in this case, you've got both a queen and a light square bishop for white, which means to play f6 would be a very bad idea. And not just that, you're essentially pinning your knight to your king, which means the knight on d5 can't move at all. So black plays bishop b7, protecting the pawn and possibly improving it, because if the pawn on c6 ever moves or disappears, you've got this very strong bishop on the long diagonal hitting g2. And so if let's say, for example, the bishop sees g2 and the queen could get to g5, we'll be threatening checkmate. The same with if the queen could get to d5, again, checkmate. So it's not a bad place to put your bishop, but it's at this point, the bishop isn't doing much. I would consider the bishop to be a bad piece. It's not doing much. So, but white continues to play a5, and this is an interesting idea, I would say, and the idea is pretty simple. Or not, it's again possibly creating a weakness. So create weaknesses is one idea. And there's a tactical idea behind it as well. And the idea is black can't take, because if black takes, he loses his bishop on b7. And if white takes, and well, a takes, the rook can take the other rook. It's another open file. I'm not actually sure if I think a5 was the correct move here, because now it allows b5. So I think this is a very possible move now, and I don't think it's necessarily a very good move. So a5, and black decides to play rook to c8, and the idea is that he's expecting the file of the c file to open up, and once the c file opens up, the rook is already here controlling the file, so possibly taking an open file. I'm still not sure why a5 was played per se, but I'll keep on. So let's actually look at it, because that's a way to study a game as well. If you've got a question, why not look at it? So a takes on, so let's say b5 was played. Sometimes I actually do use the computer for scenarios like this. b4 doesn't work. I see it now. So the top computer move in this position is to play g3, but the reason why, and I only notice it now, why why this is not a threat is the pawn is pinned to the queen. No, the pawn is pinned to the bishop. So if the pawn ever takes your bishop, you take his bishop as well. So pretty fine. Thing is, I don't think it's the biggest threat if the pawn takes, because after pawn takes, rook takes, the queen or bishop could take, but the bishop is most likely going to take. So it's really not end of the world. And yeah, moving your rook to c8 is fine. Not sure if a5 was the correct move. Actually, we can check that. So looking at the lines, so stock fares at roughly 22, 23 depth thinks a5 is the best move. Not entirely sure why. I think it's again idea of taking space. I would have probably played rook to c1, but yeah, that's why I'm not Rossolimo. a5, it's just to take space. If he takes the bishop, hangs, he can't push his own pawn. Your pawn will actually move to a6 most likely, and things can get a bit messy, I think. So a5, rook c8, and now Rossolimo plays knight e4. Once more improving his knight, and now it controls even more squares. That's important. Now f6 is a possible check. But yeah, I think also rook c8 was played to possibly play c5, and if c5 d takes on c5, the rook could take. So knight to e4 just stops the rook from taking back, pretty much. So now the queen actually gets into the mix as well. Queen to c2, improving the queen, and also threatening that if this ever gets, if the pawn ever moves off the c file, so if the c6 pawn ever moves off the c file, there's a very great possibility that the bishop on c4 might be hanging in some line. So if the knight on e4, for example, wasn't there, it would be a hanging bishop. But now, the thing is, I think black played inaccurately, which is why the game seems to flow better for white. And now we see why a5 was that good, because now you're restricting the bishop even more. And again, like I said, the more advanced the pawn gets, the closer it gets to promotion, the stronger it is. So let's write down advanced pawn. It's a very important concept. And it stops the bishop from standing on b7. So it will not be able to go to c1. So the bishop moves to a8. And white plays queen to h3. So white is essentially is planning on doing a checkmate threat, is my opinion. So for example, if white could play knight to c5, this is a checkmate threat. And the only real way to stop it is h7. So h6. So black continues by playing knight to f4, attacking the queen while getting out of the while also leaving d5 not being attacked anymore. I like it, but at the same time, I don't know if I think f4 is the best spot for the knight. So the queen just moves to g4 once more. It's threatening to take the knight. It stops knight to e2 check. And it also threatens a very, well, I will say a nasty check, which is knight to f6 check. Because the pawn on g7 is pinned to the king, he actually can't take. So I have to say it's a very interesting position already, but difficult to play for black. Now black decides to play knight e to d5, and it's to protect his knight on f4 and to stop a check on f6. Now white is moving his rook to a3. So on one hand, the rook is improved because, well, it's not doing much at this point. So why not get it into the game? Secondly, this is called a rook lift. And this is something to look out for in your own game. So rook lift. The idea is your rook is being lifted so that you could possibly bring your rook to g3 and threaten to checkmate black. Now black retreats his knight from f4 to e6. Now retreating is usually a sign that you made a mistake at some point in your game. Retreating, there could be good reasons to retreat, like it might be actually the best move or possible to take a piece to a certain direction. The only way to get your piece to a specific square is by retreating it. But in this case, the knight, I think, is just moved to protect c7. White continues to play bishop takes on d5, getting rid of this knight that was protecting f6. C takes, and now knight to f6 check. The king is forced to move to h8, and now a very beautiful tactical idea. And in fact, I would actually say, I don't know if there's a name for this specific checkmate, because there's multiple checkmates here, but one thing I will recommend is doing checkmate puzzles, learning all the different types of checkmates, doing the training for them, and also doing puzzles in general is good for your tactical vision. And white plays this very cool and calm queen to g6. In fact, I don't know what the computer would judge this as, but I would judge it to be a brilliant move. Just from the fact that it's a sacrifice of the queen. But the reason why it is absolutely a bad idea to take this queen is if f takes on g6, knight will take on g6 check. The king can't go to g8, so he's forced to take with his pawn on h6, and rook to h3 is checkmate. The second variation is the same idea. H takes on g6. It's even cleaner because rook to h3 is checkmate. Moving your pawn up to h6 will not work, as that's just queen to h7 checkmate. So black in this position tried the very last move, queen to c2, saying let's trade queens. Without queens on the board, you can't checkmate me, and I'm going to take your queen if you don't take me. But the sad part is, let's say, for the heck of it, white actually played h3. Okay, not h3. Let's say, for the heck of it, what would be a good option? It's very difficult to say what would be a good option. But basically, if the queen took, the knight will still take, and a checkmate will still be reached. So if the queen could take on c6, it wouldn't take the checkmate threat away. And white just continued with his own checkmate idea, and that is rook takes on h7 is checkmate. If the queen were to take, while knight takes on g6, the f pawn is forced to take, and rook on h7 is checkmate. And well, after rook h3, black resigned. So, what did we learn from the game? So, there's some tactical ideas in the game which we can learn from, and some of the ideas is simply pins. Pins is very important. So, for example, there was multiple times where pin is an idea. So, for example, when a5 was played, b4 is not possible because there's a pin involved. In this position, where was the other pin? I remember seeing another pin somewhere. Yes, here. The g7 pawn is pinned to the king. So again, very important part. So there's very very educational tactics we can see here. And another tactic I would recommend looking at, and I'm still very bad at it by the way, is sacrifices. This is a very beautiful game, and in this specific instance, I will say that usually when you think of a sacrifice, the sacrifice is I'm giving up my queen for a pawn, for example. But this is a sacrifice I struggle with myself, and that is just to move my queen to a spot and say, if you're not going to take me, I'm going to checkmate you next move. And you can't take me because that leads to checkmate as well. But it's just a move. It's not even to take a piece. It's just threatening to do something, and that's a sacrifice. And this is beautiful. And yes, this was indeed a game by Nicolas Rossolimo. Another reason to study master games is to learn about the opening you're playing. So if you play the Italian, it's very good to actually look at master games of the Italian to learn and see ideas in it. Now, a very important thing about the master games, if you were to pick, try and look for older master games. Master games like this game came from 1967. It was in Puerto Rico. That's pretty much all I know about it. But 1967. Look for games that's before, I would say, 2004 and before it, because the newer master games, for example, the era of Hikaru, Nakamura, Magnus Carlsen, and so forth, they're playing a bit closer to computers in opening preparation because we're using computers, which means the ideas and stuff is a lot harder to understand. And well, they learn from the computer as well because the computer is just simply that much stronger than us, the highest rated player in the world today, and he was once upon a time the highest rated player in history. Magnus Carlsen is 2,800. I think his highest peak rating was 2,883. I know it was 80, but I think it was 83, somewhere in the 80. The estimated rating of computers at this point, the highest rated computer right now, Stockfish, I think is around 3,800. To say 3,500 is more than accurate enough though. So they learn from the computer, and the computer plays very complex and hard to understand moves. Which is why it's, in my opinion, not a good idea to look at newer master games, even though there's still a bunch of them that I think is fantastic to look at. But it's probably better to stick to the older master games and to learn from why they made the move. And that's also how you should study an opening. You should look at the move and understand why the move was played, not memorize the move. I hope this video was helpful, and if it was, please comment down below. Tell me what you want to see next, and yeah, subscribe if you want to see more. Well, peace out.